At 88, Morgan Freeman speaks with the quiet certainty of a man who has seen truth up close and now names the 6 actors he loved most. Number 1, Clint Eastwood, the silent commander. Morgan Freeman's admiration for Clint Eastwood did not begin with Hollywood glamour, red carpets, or industry hype. It began in the kind of silence only 2 seasoned craftsmen could share, an unspoken understanding forged on the set of Unforgiven, where both men stood at turning points in their careers. Eastwood had already carved out his legacy as the lone, unshakable figure of American cinema, a man who needed no introduction and asked for none. Freeman, carrying decades of perseverance behind him, recognized immediately that Eastwood possessed a presence unlike any other he had encountered. Freeman often said that Eastwood never tried to act tough. He simply was. There was no posturing in him, no hint of performance behind the eyes. What struck Freeman most was the ease with which Eastwood commanded a room. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need lengthy explanations or theatrical gestures. His authority was quiet, steady, and absolute, like a mountain that had no need to prove its height. On the set of Unforgiven, Freeman watched Eastwood move with an economy of motion that bordered on the poetic. Every step, every glance, every decision was deliberate. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. For a man like Freeman, who had built his own career on the power of restraint, this was more than impressive. It was affirming. It told him that he was standing beside someone who understood the deeper architecture of storytelling, that truth lives not in noise, but in discipline. Eastwood's direction mirrored his acting. No shouting across the set, no endless retakes, no ego disguised as perfectionism. Instead, he offered clarity, stability, a kind of artistic trust that allowed actors to discover the moment rather than perform it. Freeman often recalled how scenes unfolded under Eastwood's guidance, smoothly, organically, as though the story itself were breathing through them. Nothing forced, nothing embellished, just honest work done by people who respected the craft. What Freeman valued most was Eastwood's ability to let silence carry weight. He knew when to speak and when not to. He knew that sometimes the strongest line in a scene was the one left unspoken. For older viewers who remember the raw stillness of classic westerns, the way a single look across a dusty street could say more than a page of dialogue, Freeman's admiration for Eastwood feels instantly recognizable. It is the admiration of one craftsman for another. When Freeman returned to Eastwood's side years later for Million Dollar Baby, the bond between them had deepened into something rare. Eastwood entrusted him with the role of Scrap, a character whose quiet wisdom mirrored Freeman's own. The film earned Freeman the Academy Award that had eluded him for decades, but he did not speak of the honor with vanity. Instead, he credited Eastwood with creating the environment in which that performance could live. "Clint gave me space," Freeman once said. He trusted the pause. To Freeman, that trust mattered more than trophies. Their collaboration became a model of artistic respect. They were different kinds of men, one carrying the rugged solitude of the American frontier, the other carrying the contemplative calm of a life spent observing humanity, but they met at the crossroads of truth. They shared a belief that storytelling is not an act of spectacle, but an act of sincerity. It is no surprise, then, that when Freeman names the 6 actors he loved most, Clint Eastwood stands at the top of the list, not because of fame, but because of integrity. Eastwood represented the very qualities Freeman valued above all: restraint, discipline, and a quiet command that never needed to shout to be heard. In the presence of Clint Eastwood, Freeman found a kindred spirit, someone who understood that true strength is never loud and true artistry never hurried. For 2 men shaped by decades of work, hardship, and evolution, theirs was not the friendship of casual banter or shared indulgence. It was the friendship of craftsmen, of men who recognized the weight of silence and the dignity of purpose. And in that stillness between them, Morgan Freeman found something he would carry for the rest of his life: the reminder that greatness does not call attention to itself. It simply stands, unshaken, and lets the world come to understand it. Number 2. Jessica Tandy, the quiet teacher. If Clint Eastwood was the silent commander in Morgan Freeman's life, then Jessica Tandy was the quiet teacher, a presence so gentle, so deliberate, that she left a permanent imprint on everyone who shared the screen with her. When Freeman thinks of actresses he loved working with, admired deeply, and learned from quietly, Jessica Tandy stands near the very top. Their paths crossed most famously in Driving Miss Daisy, a film that demanded a kind of subtlety few actors could sustain. It was a story not built on spectacle or grand revelations, but on the small, delicate movements of human connection. For Freeman, stepping into the role of Hoke Colburn was already deeply personal. He had lived with the character on stage long before Hollywood ever rolled a camera. But when Jessica Tandy entered the frame, the entire rhythm changed. Freeman once described acting alongside her as listening to music. She did not force a moment, did not oversell an emotion, did not chase attention. She simply lived inside the character, in the same quiet way a musician feels the beat before playing the first note. Tandy understood timing, not just theatrical timing, but human timing, the kind that breathes, pauses, hesitates, and reveals truth in the simplest inflection. Freeman admired this deeply. He valued restraint in performers, but what Tandy possessed went beyond restraint. It was precision. Every glance, every shift of posture, every carefully measured breath had purpose. She carried decades of stage and film experience, yet her presence never overwhelmed. Instead, it invited stillness. And in that stillness, Freeman found a partner who understood that real acting is not showing, it's listening. If you were alive when Driving Miss Daisy first graced theaters, you may remember the emotional quiet of that film, the way it unfolded like a memory rather than a movie. That atmosphere was due, in no small part, to Tandy. She embodied Daisy with such dignity, fragility, and fire that audiences felt they had known her their entire lives. And Freeman recognized that magic instantly. He often recalled that working with her taught him to trust small moments more than grand expressions. She showed him that vulnerability does not need volume, and that an entire lifetime can be conveyed through a softened gaze or a gently delivered line. Freeman valued that lesson. It became part of his own cinematic fingerprint. The controlled power, the patient pauses, the emotional clarity. Off camera, their relationship was built on mutual respect and mutual quiet. They did not rehearse endlessly. They did not debate scenes with theatrical intensity. Instead, they spent time in calm conversation, exchanging thoughts about memory, aging, laughter, and the subtle ways people change over time. Freeman once said she had a presence that made everyone else slow down, breathe, and pay attention. She turned the set into a place of reflection. When awards season arrived, Driving Miss Daisy became a sensation. Jessica Tandy won her long-deserved Oscar, and Freeman earned one of the most important nominations of his career. But when Freeman looked back, he did not fixate on acclaim. What he remembered was her discipline, her humility, and the way she shifted the energy of a scene simply by entering it. He remembered how she respected time, not just the time they spent acting, but the time they spent simply being human together. Freeman later described her as a living metronome, steady, measured, and always in the right emotional rhythm. It wasn't a criticism, it was the highest praise he could give. Tandy taught him something invaluable, that the spaces between actions matter just as much as the actions themselves. That silence, when handled with intention, can speak a truth words never could. And for a man whose own craft is rooted in stillness and thoughtfulness, that lesson was a gift. Jessica Tandy embodied an artistry built on grace, not the kind found in grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but the quiet grace of a woman who understood the emotional architecture of a story. Freeman loved her not just as a co-star, but as a guiding presence, someone who reminded him that acting is, at its core, an act of listening. And long after the camera stopped rolling, her influence remained. When Freeman considers the actors he loved most, he chooses those who shaped his soul, not his resume. Tandy was one of them. Perhaps one of the most important. She was the gentle force who reaffirmed that honesty in performance does not require force at all, only truth, patience, and the courage to be still. Number 3, Tim Robbins, the idealist of hope. Among the actors who shaped Morgan Freeman's career, Tim Robbins holds a place unlike any other. Their bond was not forged through years of collaboration or shared circles in Hollywood. It was born inside the cold, echoing walls of a decommissioned prison in Ohio, the set of The Shawshank Redemption. a film that would come to define hope for millions. Freeman first encountered Robbins not as a co-star competing for attention, but as a man utterly consumed by his craft. Robbins approached the role of Andy Dufresne with a stillness that felt almost spiritual. Freeman, who had built his own legacy on control and subtlety, recognized something familiar in Robbins, a performer who believed that truth lived in patience. The conditions on set were grueling, long days under harsh lights, endless takes in the sweltering laundry rooms, the cold seeping through the stone walls of the old penitentiary. Yet Robbins remained composed, never breaking character, never losing the emotional thread of Andy's journey. Freeman watched him with admiration, not because Robbins tried to impress, but because he worked with a discipline that felt rare among actors of his generation. Freeman often spoke about the nights he and Robbins spent discussing the script, quiet conversations about endurance, justice, and the fragile ways hope can survive even in confinement. Robbins didn't approach the film as a performance. He approached it as a belief. He understood that Andy wasn't just a character living through injustice. He was a man carrying the burden of light when darkness seemed inevitable. For Freeman, this resonated deeply. Red and Andy's on-screen friendship became one of the most enduring bonds in cinema, but the real connection grew behind the scenes. Robbins grounded the film with his steadiness, giving Freeman the perfect counterpart, one resigned, one defiant, both tethered to a single fragile human truth. What Freeman respected most was Robbins's moral sincerity. He wasn't acting to win anything, not awards, not applause, not prestige. He was acting because he believed stories about endurance mattered. In a world that often celebrates flash over substance, Robbins reminded Freeman that purpose and patience were the soul of great storytelling. When The Shawshank Redemption initially failed at the box office, neither man panicked. Freeman credited Robbins for helping him stay centered through the uncertainty. They knew the film carried something timeless, something that would find its audience eventually. And it did. Today, when viewers, especially those who remember the film's early days, speak of hope, of friendship, of redemption, they speak the language these two men carved together. Robbins became, in Freeman's memory, the idealist who left a quiet but unforgettable mark. A man who believed that even in the hardest places, light finds a way in. And for Freeman, that belief was not just inspiring, it was transformative. Number 4. Denzel Washington, the reflection of discipline. If Tim Robbins reminded Freeman of hope, Denzel Washington reminded him of discipline. Among contemporary actors, Freeman has often said, Denzel is the one who never lies, a compliment that carries immeasurable weight, coming from a man who built his legacy on truth. Freeman's admiration for Washington did not come from shared films. They never played opposite each other in a leading capacity, but from decades of watching him work with unwavering focus. For Freeman, Denzel represented the standard, the benchmark, the embodiment of preparation, precision, and the refusal to take shortcuts, no matter how tempting the industry made them. Washington's performances, whether as Malcolm X, Alonzo Harris, or Troy Maxson, were rooted in a ferocity that came not from physical power, but from emotional honesty. He never relied on charm to carry a scene. He relied on truth. Freeman respected that. He valued performers who brought integrity, not theatrics, to their work. What struck Freeman most was that Denzel never broke rhythm. Whether on stage or on film, Washington carried himself like a craftsman, one who understood that mastery is the product of discipline. The viewer may see the fire on the surface, but the foundation beneath is built from relentless study, rehearsal, and self-examination. Freeman recognized this instantly because it mirrored his own approach. Though they rarely shared the screen, the two developed a bond rooted in mutual respect. Two men of similar purpose, carrying the weight of representation on their shoulders without allowing it to crush the artist beneath. Freeman once said that when he watched Denzel act, he saw what excellence looks like when purpose meets precision. When Freeman won his Oscar for $1 Million Baby, one of the first calls he received was from Washington. It wasn't a grand speech or a flourish of praise, just a quiet exchange between two craftsmen who understood what the moment meant. Freeman remembered that call as a salute from one soldier to another. Denzel Washington, in Freeman's eyes, is not just one of the great actors of his generation. He is the reflection of what happens when a man refuses to compromise his craft And that uncompromising discipline is exactly why Freeman counts him among the 6 he loved most. Number 5. Gene Hackman, the master of invisible power among the actors. Morgan Freeman holds in highest regard. Gene Hackman stands as a steady and controlled force, a performer who could dominate a scene without ever raising his voice. Freeman often spoke of Hackman with a kind of reverence reserved only for artists who understand restraint at its deepest level. Their most iconic collaboration came in Unforgiven, where Hackman's portrayal of Sheriff Little Bill Daggett collided with Freeman's quiet moral presence. It was a clash not of volume, but of gravity, the kind of tension only 2 seasoned craftsmen could create. Freeman admired how Hackman seemed to disappear into his character, shedding every trace of the performer until only the truth of the man remained. Hackman carried a discipline that felt almost old world. He didn't chase celebrity. He didn't seek spotlight or applause. He valued intention, clarity, and the integrity of the work itself. This resonated deeply with Freeman, who shared the same philosophy. While others sought attention, Hackman sought honesty. And when he stepped onto a set, that honesty radiated through the room. Freeman often recalled how Hackman prepared for scenes, not through dramatic rituals or lengthy processes, but through quiet observation. He would sit still, studying the emotional architecture of a moment, deciding not what to show, but what to withhold. For him, the power of a character lay not in what they expressed, but in what they carried beneath the surface. Freeman admired that subtlety. It was the kind of acting that couldn't be taught, only lived. During the filming of Unforgiven, Morgan Freeman saw firsthand how Hackman transformed silence into dominance. In scenes where the sheriff enforced his brutal vision of law, Hackman's stillness felt more threatening than any outburst. Freeman respected the precision behind every gesture, every pause. Hackman never decorated a performance. He shaped it, like a craftsman carving meaning from stone. Years later, when Hackman stepped away from Hollywood, Freeman called his departure a loss of gravity for cinema. He meant that few actors carried such weight without needing to announce it. Few could command presence without chasing it. Few left behind performances that remained unforgettable, not because they shouted, but because they whispered with clarity the world couldn't ignore. To Freeman, Gene Hackman was proof that the strongest performances come not from force, but from truth handled with meticulous care. He loved Hackman for his integrity, for his invisible power, and for his unwavering commitment to the craft both men held sacred. Number 6. Sidney Poitier, the North Star of dignity. Of all the names that shaped Morgan Freeman's life, none resonates more deeply than Sidney Poitier. When Freeman speaks of him, it is not with casual admiration or simple respect. It is with the kind of reverence a man holds for the person who showed him what was possible long before the world gave him a chance. Poitier was not just an actor, he was a path, a living testament to grace, courage, and the quiet revolution of dignity. Freeman grew up watching Poitier navigate an industry that offered few roles to black actors, let alone roles of depth and humanity. In films like Lilies of the Field and In the Heat of the Night, Poitier carried himself with a poise that transcended entertainment. He wasn't simply performing, he was redefining what representation could look like. For Freeman, who spent decades fighting for the smallest opportunities, Poitier was the beacon in the fog. He once said Poitier was the reason I knew it was possible, not because Poitier shouted for respect, but because he embodied it so fully that respect had no choice but to follow. When Freeman finally met Poitier, he described the moment as meeting the horizon, familiar yet expansive, humbling yet empowering. Poitier spoke softly, choosing his words with the same intention he brought to every performance. He treated Freeman not as a student, but as a fellow traveler, someone carrying the same responsibility to move the world forward with dignity, not anger. Poitier once told Freeman, "You must walk through doors so others may follow." Freeman carried that message into every role requiring moral gravity. Red in The Shawshank Redemption, Nelson Mandela in Invictus, or the countless narrations where his voice became a guide for millions. He did not imitate Poitier. He expanded the path Poitier built, widening it for new generations. When Poitier passed away, Freeman said simply, He showed us the mountain and told us to climb. For Freeman, Poitier remains the foundation, the quiet pillar of principle, courage, and humanity that shaped not only his career, but his understanding of what it means to stand tall. And so, when Morgan Freeman names the 6 actors he loved most, Sidney Poitier is more than a choice. He is the heart of the list. Hearing these 6 names together, you realize Freeman wasn't honoring idols. He was honoring the pieces of himself each one helped him discover, the quiet truths that shaped his long, steady walk through cinema. At 88, Morgan Freeman carries their lessons like familiar echoes. Because in the end, greatness isn't found in applause, but in the quiet dignity of those who shaped your journey. Morgan Freeman's revelation is more than a tribute. It is a reminder of the era he comes from, a time when craftsmanship mattered more than spectacle, when silence carried weight, and when dignity defined the true giants of the screen. His 6 choices reflect not just admiration, but the lineage of wisdom that helped shape one of cinema's most trusted voices. One of Freeman's most beloved reflections sums up his philosophy: learning how to be still, to really be still, and let life happen. That stillness becomes a radiance.